Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Point Forward 5. My name is J.R. Radcliffe. I am joined by Bucks beat reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, Jim Owczarski. The Milwaukee Bucks are the number 4 seed in the East right now. What is happening? They've won 4 straight games, granted, all at home, all against teams that they probably should beat. But coming off a loss in Madison Square Garden, kind of an ugly loss against the Knicks, they have righted the ship once again and are in a pretty good spot, I would say. Wanted to chat a little bit about it here with Jim. Jim, I just saw the movie A Complete Unknown about Bob Dylan. Are you familiar with this movie?
I am familiar of its existence. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So Bob Dylan, the thing you really get a sense of is that they always stay. He's trying to stay so ahead of the curve that even his audience can't really catch up. You know, they think, oh, he's a great folk musician, and then he goes electric, and really that continued throughout his career. He's always trying to stay so cutting edge that his audience always gets confused. That's how I feel about the Milwaukee Bucks. Not saying that they're the Bob Dylan of our time, of our athletic sphere, I guess. But, I think, they lost to the Knicks, a team that, resoundingly, they're bad. Like, we can't say anything else about it. They're not good enough. Then they go and win 4 games in a row. I feel like we've been doing this cat and mouse game all year long where they go through rough stretches, then good stretches, then rough stretches. Right now, having seen them play these last 4 games, I would say that's still a team, when healthy, that can absolutely contend for the Eastern Conference championship. I mean, they really do still. Damian Lillard looks great. The Bucks look like they're humming along. But I also know it's just 4 home games in January. So give me, again, your progress report, how you feel about this team. Is it just a mess of inconsistency, or are they showing they really are, good enough to win the East?
Yeah, it's so you got to zoom out a little bit. And that's a little nuanced question, I guess. But yes, 4 in a row. It's 7 of 8 again. Mm-hmm. But if we go back to November 12th, JR, they are winning at a 70% clip. Only really? OKC and Cleveland have won more often than the Milwaukee Bucks.
November 12th was a long time ago. That's incredible.
Yeah, that 70% is really good. However, we have done podcasts since then. In there, of like the 9 losses, 5 of them have been to lottery teams. And some of them have looked really bad, like the Brooklyn losses and the one in Chicago. And like, we could say Portland was awful. And like, not every team's going to win every game, but I don't know, like that's those, and to lose 4 or 5 to those teams, right? Like, yeah, that's what made that look worse or feel worse in the immediate moment than, when you zoom out over 2 months, right? Also,
those are home games too. We should point out the 2 Nets
home games Portland too. Yes.
How do you lose those games? My goodness.
Yeah. Also lost to Boston, Cleveland, and New York. Yeah. So in there, a clear line of separation of the top of the East and the Bucks. So the Bucks are winning all these games, but they didn't beat anybody really good. They lost to a lot of teams that were really bad. And so they're the 4th seed in the East, which I guess makes total sense, right? Like, so, I feel like, look, I can't, I go with Chris and Giannis. When after that New York loss, they were both like, we need to win against the best teams as well as all the other teams, citing an 0-8 record against the Celtics, the Knicks, and the Cavs. Like, that's not good to not even win a single game out of 8 tries. Several of them were blowouts. On the other hand, Dame was like, yeah, but we weren't healthy for all those games, and you could argue we should have won some games in Cleveland, and well, we didn't, but we could have, So, like, I think if they were to play the Cavs like today, JR, would they win the game? They're probably better positioned to do so than in November. But I don't. They're not going to get that chance, at least. So, I think it's fair and right to be positive about this team, that they're stringing together wins. I think there's a pod, JR, where I said that. I'm like, the vibes are good, but you're not doing anything. And here they have done it. They have won 7 of 8, 4 in a row. They're like within shouting distance of the Knicks for the 3 seed.
For sure.
So even though they don't have the tiebreaker with the Knicks, like to jump 3 games in 41 is a totally doable thing. I think the Celtics is still a little pie in the sky, but the 3 seed is right there. And that was not a thing we were talking about, JR, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, 2 months ago. So they do deserve credit for that. And I think when they are kind of running at full efficiency, they do look like a team who, as I have said, has arguably the highest ceiling in the East, maybe outside of the Celtics.
Giannis Antetokounmpo was just named Eastern Conference Player of the Week. I once again, even myself, maybe take him for granted. It's like, oh, he was Eastern Player of the Week. What did he do this week? And you start looking at the numbers like, oh, yeah, he just ruled again for another week. And like I said earlier, Damian Lillard really appears to be in a good place right now. So I ask specifically about these two guys working together. We've talked a lot about this, but I don't know if we're at the peak of where those guys could eventually be, but it really feels like we've gotten here, and I'm going to ask you about sort of Doc Rivers part of the equation in a second, because you wrote a really compelling thing looking back a year later after the Bucks made this kind of crazy decision to move on from a first-year coach with a great record midway through that season. But it does feel like we've kind of hit a breakthrough point. Maybe it's just that they're healthy. Maybe it's that simple. I don't know. How do you look at it?
Yeah, it is interesting, JR, that a year ago, just about of this pod is when Adrian Griffin was fired, and they're winning 63% of the time, right? So I do think there is an element of health, and that is the overriding issue, concern, thing with this team. And it is a true fact. Chris Middleton missed 20 something games, minutes restriction. He is not yet cleared to play 30 minutes a game, and now it's late January. That's not great.
Nope.
But obviously they're moving to that, hopefully. And Dame and Giannis, there was that period, JR, where that illness they had was respiratory for both. And not only did Giannis miss, I think, 3 games with it, Dame missed 3. They were not right for about a week's worth of games after. Like, if you look at their splits, their 5 games after the return of illness, like Giannis was missing like 8 layups a game in that stretch. Like, his shooting percentage went from 62% to 52%. And Dame cratered to low 30s. They were clearly not functioning at a healthy level, even though they were back on the floor. And maybe that contributes to some of that 4 and 5, those lottery team losses. So, but it happened, right? So yeah, I do think health is a big part of it, particularly for the big 3. And you mentioned Griffin. I mean, that's one of the reasons, perhaps the reason, if you talk to some people, that they were 30-13 is because Chris, Dame, and Giannis, of the 43 games, I think they played 38 or 39 of them together at full capacity. And so their high-end talent was fully on display in the first half of last season. And then, as we know, Doc Rivers takes over, Chris gets hurt, and then, then we know what happened. So I think they're better, JR. I wrote this in the piece that it's more than vibes, but that's a big part of it. Like, they believe in Doc Rivers. They believe in what he's coaching. They believe that coaching can get them where they need to be, where they want to be. And when you have such high-end talent, honestly, belief and respect of the coaches is an important thing. And he has that. And so that's been a baseline for them. Doc has shown an ability and a willingness to change scheme, lineups, rotations. And while I may quibble with some of that and still do, you can't say it hasn't worked. It pulled them out of that mess at 2-8 to now on the doorstep of a 3 seed, JR. So, I think at some point he'll need to settle on an 8 or a 9 that, like, you feel good about, or you can set your watch to, if you will. But for now, he's kind of pushing those right buttons, and now they're winning at a high rate, and it's hard to say. I don't know. Are they better? I don't know, because it's all about the playoffs, right? With that, like if they finish the year on a 70% clip, JR, I mean, then of course you're like, wow, that really turned. But until they beat some good teams and finish as either the 3 seed or a strong 4, it's kind of hard to say that they're like so much better, because again, we just haven't seen them out of the second round in 4 years.
Yeah, and the schedule ahead is not exactly favorable. No. You've got a West Coast trip that includes stops with the Clippers, Jazz, Trailblazers, and Spurs. They'll be home here and there, but they got to go play the Thunder coming up soon.
Off of a home road back-to-back. Just again, terrible scheduling by the NBA.
Like Sunday night into Monday too. Wicked stuff.
Yeah, like I mean, on one hand, the league finally figured out, JR, after 5 years, to maybe not have Giannis and Nikola Jokic play each other on a back-to-back. So they figured that out. And then now they're going to be home against Memphis, which is going to be a tough game, and then have to go to Oklahoma City, like,
to face Shai.
I mean, it's a back-to-back on the road. Like the Bucks may whatever. I put it.
There's going to be some. I think they're kind of unavoidable somewhere, and this is a bad one.
That's a bad one.
Schedule loss, almost certainly. So yeah.
But I meant to interrupt. Yeah, like they're scheduled through the All-Star break, JR. It's 13 games in 22 days, and 9 of them are on the road.
Yeah, a lot of playoffs.
And two of those home games are on a back-to-back. Maybe three or 4 actually. I take that back. So it is not an easy stretch into the break in mid-February.
Yeah. Was there anything else from that, what you wrote about Doc Rivers, Adrian Griffin? I mean, in a way, I don't want to spoil it, but if it's pretty clear, that it was still probably the right move, even if the playoffs give us a little bit of an incomplete on that grade system. But in a way, it's serendipitous. I mean, I still believed in the move. I still think it was the right call. The fact that Doc Rivers was just there, available, observing, as you mentioned in the story, like who's available. Kenny Atkinson was a candidate, but then got a job. Like, who's available midway through the season to just bring in on short notice like that? Doc Rivers is a pretty impressive name to have that option. I still wonder, like, how involved was he before the decision was made? I think I'll always wonder some of those details, but was there anything else that you wanted to really highlight?
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting when this iteration of the Bucks is over, meaning Doc, Giannis, and Dame. If it ends without a trip to the finals, you'll go all the way back and say, wow, what a mistake the hire of Adrian Griffin was to begin with. Because that was the moment, right? You fire the championship winning coach and you have all summer to find the guy. And we know who they interviewed, who Doc Rivers didn't interview. He was not in that pool. Kenny Atkinson was, and they didn't pick him. And then now you look at the Cavs as we sit today, Kenny Atkinson is running one of the best programs in the league with 2 bigs and some small offense first guards. Who does that sound like? And they're getting stuff done right on both ends. And, it's a little harder when it's sort of right in your face. Like, I think the Nick Nurse thing in Philly, you're like, oh, wow, well, maybe that was okay to pass on Nick Nurse and whoever the other finalists were. So I think that part of it we'll have to wait till this is all over, JR. But in terms of, I don't know. I mean, maybe what were the other rumors? Jeff Van Gundy was available. I mean, you're there was one championship coach, and at least Rivers had been coaching the year before.
Yeah.
Like he hadn't been out of the game for too long. And the Clippers and the 76ers, yes, for all of their postseason failure,
good team,
had also been winning at 60 to 63% of the time. And so, if you're the Bucks, like, it was a not a no nonsense, but a makes sense hire. And so, Doc was there. So I think Would they have made the move, JR, if Doc wasn't sitting there? I think so. It just might have taken a little longer. Maybe they would have waited to the All-Star break. Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But, I still think in retrospect it was the right move because the team was a 5-game losing streak away from an implosion.
Yeah.
And you don't want that. And so it prevented that and has at least maybe set them up now for that higher success that they hope maybe would have come last year.
Man, speaking of the 76ers, seeing them in recent days, like that is a alternate history scenario for the Bucks. I mean, their injuries are worse than Milwaukee's, but 17 and 24 to have completely fallen off a cliff here. Like like Philadelphia fans have just got to be losing their minds because they came into this year expecting to be one of the top 3 teams in the East, and it has not happened, not even close. So Jimmy Butler, we've talked about it. I don't. As time goes on and there's still smoke around the fire, smoke where there's fire. I'm screwing up the metaphor, but like, I still don't know how I can see a scenario where a 35-year-old Jimmy Butler is brought to the Milwaukee Bucks, and like, especially because you assume it's going to cost Chris Middleton. I think it has to, if to make the math work. And what you gain there, I just can't imagine is enough to justify making that move. And yet people aren't letting this one go. They, Jimmy Butler and Miami Heat are at odds. The trade deadline is February 6th. So we still actually have some time before we probably ultimately learn what happens there. But do you think now, has anything changed in your mind? Is it closer to a possibility? How would you react to that?
I mean, I'll loop back to the start of this conversation as the Bucks have won 70% of their games since November.
Sure. Why mess with that formula?
Look, again, you always got to say anything's possible. The way my understanding of this would work, and we do have a handy trade primer over at jslonline.com, kind of breaks down the Bucks can and can't do. In order for something like that to work, they'd have to trade Pat Connaughton to a team to get under the second apron, and they would have to then trade Chris Middleton and Bobby Portis, or Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez to get Jimmy Butler. It would have to be Lopez if, for whatever reason, Bradley Beal's been floated around, which I don't. That's. I mean, whatever. So that's a lot, JR. Like, you're taking out a starter. Chris is. I mean, I get it right now. Chris is coming off the bench, but you're taking out a starter. Your 6/7th man and Giannis's primary backup. And Pat Connaughton right now is not in the rotation, but in terms of a locker room guy and a guy who, Dame and Giannis trust, and Doc Rivers implicitly. So you'd be essentially ripping apart your locker room at the seams to then try to stitch in one of the worst locker room guys in the league right now. Because I don't think the Bucks are going to pay Jimmy Butler. And that's like why this starts. When Jimmy blows up his teams, it's because they're not going to pay him. That's what he's done now in literally every step along the way. And I don't know if the gamble of, well, Jimmy will be on his best behavior in Milwaukee for X months and games because you can't assume anything with Jimmy Butler. You know what I mean? And so I always look at this, JR, if the team that knows you best, and this even goes back to football when I was covering the Packers about extensions with guys. And if the team that knows you best puts a value on you, I'm not saying teams won't undervalue their own player, but I think there's something to be said for the fact that the Heat were like, nah, we're not going to give you the max extension. You know what I mean? Like, he plays less than Chris, and that's been the beef with Chris Middleton, right? Look, Jimmy Butler has been great in the playoffs. I would venture to tell Bucks fans to put Chris up against Jimmy in the playoffs any day of the week in terms of who's done what, right, when it's mattered. So, again, I think anything's possible. I just feel like that move, or a move of that ilk, JR, where you're taking away two rotation players, three players who are so important to the locker room chemistry, to add in an unknown, regardless of who it is, feels like, man, a stretch and unnecessary. We'll see at the All-Star break. They lose 10 of 12, right? Then, think again, as Pat Riley, he didn't say this, but effectively he said it, like, things change. So I think right now that stuff seems a little beyond the pale. But again, see how this next week, 10 days goes when this team is really tested with some tough games.
Before we go, a little appreciation I would like to throw toward Taurean Prince, who, and not just because he's shooting still 46% from 3-point range. I honestly, like, if you had the all offseason signing team, I feel like Prince would have to be on it based on the amount of money that they're paying that man. Yeah. He's a regular starter. He's been a great contributor. Good for him. But more importantly, Jim, a lot of people, when they see the game stories at jsonline.com, I don't know if they go all the way to the bottom to read, all the way through the end, especially if it's just a game against the Sixers in January. But hello to this quote from Taurean Prince talking about what's been good about the Bucks lately. He says, "Time together. It's like when you meet a new girl. You can't do everything in one night. You know what I mean? You got to spend some time together, get to know each other. And hopefully the vibes are good to where you can start making good music." I assume he's just talking about, like, going to the good restaurants and stuff like that. But I love that quote. Thank you, Taurean Prince. Thank you for putting that into the ether. I laughed very much. A great little hammer on the end of your most recent game story, Jim. Very, very much appreciate Taurean Prince. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Taurean. And you know what, JR? What was so smart about that answer is there were no follow-ups to that, and he was able to just walk right out.
Thank you. We're good here.
Yeah, there was really nothing else to say after that. I mean,
we got it.
Could have been, but it was
beautiful words.
It was one of those where it started, and you're like, okay, where is this going to go? And he did a good job. It was well done.
Shouts to Taurean Prince. Having a nice year for the Milwaukee Bucks. He is Jim Owczarski. Anything else, Jim, before I send you away?
Yeah, oddly, JR, as everyone can see, this is my usual backdrop. I am not in New Orleans.
Oh, yeah.
This is the first time in 10 years as a beat writer for the Bengals, Packers, Bucks. I am missing a game on the road due to weather. New Orleans is under state of emergency. I think 6 inches of snow today, ice. And it's freezing there.
I can't believe you didn't get snowed in one day in Cincinnati and couldn't get.
No, it's it even Green Bay, right? Right. And this is going to all over the country really to cover games. And they don't know what to do with 6 inches of snow down there, let alone how to drive. So what I was told, JR, was I could maybe get to New Orleans, but then no one may be able to take me from the airport to anywhere else. So it seemed like that would not be prudent. So that's a little behind the curtain there on some of this. But West Coast trip coming up. JR, I'm interested to see. Look, this, if there are levels to this for the Bucks, this road trip and the next 2 weeks in particular is a level. And what I mean by that is this has not been a good road team since they fired Mike Budenholzer. They were under 500 on the road last year. I think they just got to 500 now. They should beat the Pelicans. I'm assuming this game is going to get played. The Pelicans suck. That's a game they need to win. Mm-hmm. So, and look, this road trip, you're at the Clippers' new arena, which from everything I've heard, JR, is actually a difficult place to play for a first-time team, seeing it. There's that wall behind the one basket of fans, which I have heard actually does mess with teams' free throws. It's because it's just such a crazy thing for them to get used to. And then, yes, Portland and Utah are in the tank business. We know this. However, at Utah, back-to-back at Portland, that in and of itself is not super easy. Altitude in Utah, Portland, back-to-back. And then, of course, we mentioned the Oklahoma City game. I'm skipping ahead a week. You got an Atlanta team that has, unlike the Bucks, has actually beaten the Celtics, the Cavs, the Knicks. They pounded the Bucks here in Milwaukee before the Bucks got their revenge. So it's a long way to say, JR, I feel like we started this conversation, you're asking like, okay, are they a contender? Can they actually do it? I think these games, let's find out. Like, win most of these road games. You know, I don't think anyone's going to feel any kind of way about a loss in Oklahoma City. Blowout, close, right? But don't lose to the Hornets again. You know what I mean? Don't lose to the Jazz and the Blazers on a back-to-back. Like, you got to be done with that. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like this next stretch will tell us, are you the 4th seed because you can beat all these kind of middling teams? Or are you really going to make a run for a top 3 seed in this conference and be a force? And you've got to win on the road, JR. So I think I know we'll pod between here and then, but I do think going forward, that's something for Bucks fans to think about. It's like, okay, we feel good about this, but that's what you should be looking for, in my opinion, at the end of this week once they go to LA.
Shouts to Jalen Johnson of the Atlanta Hawks, Wisconsin's own. And All-Star games, the rosters will be announced in the not too distant future. I'm curious, Tyrese Halliburton and Tyler Hero kind of right on that border, I think. I would imagine Halliburton gets the nod just by virtue of kind of the momentum that he's built up over the last couple of years. Hero has never been an All-Star. Again, 2 Wisconsinites who are always in the thick of it. I know it has been a step down for Halliburton this year, but I see the Pacers and the Bucks still being in kind of a little bit of a battle for playoff standing as the season goes on here, maybe toward the end. So again, read everything Jim Owczarski has at jsonline.com, whether or not weather will allow him to travel to follow this team all across certainly the western part of the United States in the coming weeks. Thank you, Jim. We will talk to you again soon. Thanks for listening to the Point Forward podcast. We'll talk